Resident Evil Village is one of my most anticipated games of all time. This game directly follows the story from Resident Evil 7 with Ethan Winters, and I could not be happier with the result. Ever since we got the first look last year and one of the trailers, I knew this game was going to be special, and I'll explain in a little bit why. This game is a beautiful work of art, not only as a video game or as a Resident Evil entry in the franchise, but also as a horror property. I think Resident Evil 7 did a tremendous job with this, with the theme of the game being so close to classic horror themes and classic horror movies. And this one does the same thing, but in its own complete way. It is safe to say that both games are very different from each other, and I was so impressed with what they managed to craft with this universe. So without further ado, I'm going to go and say what I liked about the game, starting with the major themes in Resident Evil Village. So let me explain why I think this game is going to be such a horror masterpiece and go down as one of the most influential works of art from the 2020s, like centered around horror. I think that Resident Evil Village takes a lot of themes from a lot of different things like literature, movies, and it's just everything, like it has so many variations of the horror, but it all meshes in such a perfect way that I thought it was done tremendously. I think Capcom's decision to like change the franchise from classic zombie sci-fi into like straight up horror was a great decision, and I could not be happier with what they did. Every area of the game is just so beautiful in so many ways, and it's so full of visuals, and the game really makes the best use of the next gen console's power. I think the graphics were so much better compared to previous games in the franchise, and this makes me very happy because the future of gaming looks so bright with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and Series S. I think this game really was better in the graphics department, and it really feels in some parts, especially things like the hands and like some of the facial features are more advanced. And just seeing the village so detailed in so many ways, like coupled with the soundtrack and a lot of the themes and like horrible monsters and horrible visuals, like really make this a wonderful work of horror art. Some areas like Castle Dimitrescu are really influenced by Gothic and Bloodborne type stuff, and then there's like a whole section that feels like a Silent Hill revival, which I really appreciated, and I would love to see more of this in future Resident Evil games. From the very beginning of the game, you're greeted with a really awesomely animated short film called Village of Shadows, which looks like a Tim Burton film, and it like that, from that point you know that this game is special and that the Capcom team like went full on with the creative like freedom they had, like introducing all these horror things and creating just this masterpiece that I really enjoyed, and I think really makes the best use of everything. Like speaking of Tim Burton, like I can feel a lot of his influence throughout the game. Also some Guillermo del Toro, especially in the Moreau section of the game where you battle the giant fish. Like I could really feel some Guillermo del Toro vibes in there. And just like it's so full of references. There's like a lot of, especially with the story. I think the story has a lot of cosmic horror undertones, even though it fits within the Resident Evil narrative of just like everything being bioweapons and viruses and stuff, but like it's still, there's still a lot of fantasy, even though it's explained with science. Like everything feels like dark fantasy, and that's something I really appreciated. Like Resident Evil 8 really shines in the horror and the creative fantasy aspects of the franchise. So now let me talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is really similar to Resident Evil 7. It has a lot of the same mechanics, with the shooting. I feel a little improvement on the shooting and the gameplay. And one thing that was really hyped in the trailers was the whole inventory system and the crafting and modification upgrade system with the guns. But I feel like that was a little overhyped. The Duke is the new merchant in this one. Like it has the merchant from Resident Evil 4. Same system, but I think Resident Evil 4's system was way better. It was a game that came out 16 years ago, and I felt like it was a little bit more challenging, more fulfilling. It had a lot more, I think it had more guns, but the guns are still pretty decent, and the shooting is also pretty fun, especially with all the new monster variations. Resident Evil 7 had a lot of monsters, but it was mostly like molded variations. Like there wasn't really much variation besides like the molded creatures and the bosses, like the Baker family and like some of the final bosses of the game, like Evelyn. But this one has a lot more variation. Like each area of the game, like you visit 4 different families that each hold a piece of something that Ethan wants. So each area of the game has its own enemies. Like you battle these werewolf-like infected creatures, and then you battle in one section, like mechanical abominations that feel like something out of Saw or out of something like one of the characters in Invincible that modifies people and turns them into robots. So that's pretty awesome. Like, I love the whole variation with horror. It doesn't feel overwhelming or oversaturated. I feel like the game was really balanced in that department, so that's something I also appreciated. But yeah, the gameplay really suffers in some parts. Some areas feel imbalanced, especially with the lay system, like the new currency. So now monsters drop they drop resources, unlike Resident Evil 7, where actually in some areas it was better to just sneak around the monsters instead of killing them because they didn't drop anything, so you saved ammo. And this game feels very abundant with the ammo, like it kind of removes the survival horror elements of previous games like Resident Evil 4 or 7, or even 2 and 3, which felt like you had to manage resources a little bit better. In this one, especially with the inventory, I feel like one of the challenges from Resident Evil 4 was that your inventory filled pretty fast, and you actually had to sacrifice items in order to make room for more important items. And this one, like, never once in the game my inventory filled up, so it was pretty easy. So I wish the game would have been harder. I'm probably gonna play it in the hardest difficulty soon. But that's one of the minor complaints I have about Resident Evil Village. So now I'm going to talk about the story. The story is pretty good. I think it was really well executed, and it really expands the Resident Evil lore in some important ways that solve a lot of questions, made me ask a little bit more questions, but overall it was a great story, especially with the ending. So from this point on, I'm going to go into spoilers. So if you don't want to get the game spoiled, I recommend skipping off to the end where I give my conclusion. But now, from this point, a spoiler alert. So the game's story starts off with Ethan Winters and Mia in their house, and they basically moved on from the whole Baker incident. They were living a normal life, and suddenly their lives come crashing down, and Chris Redfield arrives. He kills Mia, well, supposedly kills Mia, because later it's revealed in the story that Mia was actually the main villain of the game, called Mother Miranda in disguise. And Chris Redfield kidnaps Ethan's newborn daughter, Rose, and from there everything is mysterious. So overall, like, through the game you discover a lot of clues which give clues about what is actually happening in the village. So you discover new areas that reveal a little bit about the story, more about the Winters true nature, especially Ethan's true nature, which is revealed in the end. And each area is so amazing. Like, you discover a lot of different enemies, like really interesting and colorful characters like Lady Dimitrescu and Moreau, which was super fun. And I think one of the most interesting characters was Lady Beneviento. Like, that whole section with the dollhouse and all that was super awesome, and it left me asking a lot of questions. Heisenberg was also pretty cool, but I thought, like, his character had a little bit more potential. We didn't really get to see more of his motivations. Like, we see him complain a lot of Mother Miranda, but I wish there would have been more, like, documents in that area that explained why he is doing what he does, like what, and also like a little bit more of the history of the village itself. But it gets explored decently. I think the game did a good job with that, and I'll probably have to play it again to catch more things that I missed the first time. So I wish Chris Redfield had a little bit more involvement in the game, because he was a little overhyped. Like, he's even on the cover of the game, so we don't really get to see much of him towards the end. But I'm glad we saw like what we saw. I think he did a good job, like an interesting conclusion after the whole Winters thing, Ethan Winters adventure through the village. Like, we get to play it as him in the last part. And it was fine. I think I'm glad, like, he didn't turn out evil, like the way they reveal that Mia wasn't actually Mia, and that he kind of killed Mother Miranda was a good thing. But overall, I wish that we got to see more of him and even play more like him in the game. I thought we were going to have, like, half Ethan and then half Chris, but it wasn't like that. But it was okay. I feel like the story was well balanced, and everything was perfectly crafted into the story with all the themes. And it, like, a lot of the things in the game didn't overstay its welcome. Like, it was just perfectly balanced with the story themes. So the game also has a lot of the classic Resident Evil things that we like, a lot of action, a lot of puzzle solving, and overall I think it's a great experience from beginning to end. It's entertaining, it has a lot of charm, a lot of different things that make it just awesome, fun, terrifying game to play. And even though it isn't as scary as Resident Evil 7, it had like the horror themes it has are just absolutely phenomenal. I think like the Lovecraftian, dark, fantasy, gothic aspects of the game, of the village, like this cold European desolate village is just so awesome. And I haven't seen many properties pull off something like that other than like classic literature like Edgar Allan Poe and that kind of stuff. So this game takes all those influences and creates such an amazing work of art that is just so cohesive and just so terrifying and just full of charm and things that horror fans like myself love. So Resident Evil Village is just amazing. I highly recommend this game, and it's going to be such a staple in gaming culture and horror culture. So yeah, I really love this game. So yeah, overall, I'm in love with this game. I enjoyed it so much. I'm going to play it in a harder difficulty, see if things are a little bit more balanced. And yeah, that's pretty much most of what I have to say. I could probably go deep into the lore and the meaning behind several things. I've been thinking of making more videos like that, actually, like analyzing certain aspects of games, like maybe philosophical themes covered in games and stuff, but that's going to be left for another day. So anyways, overall, I'm going to give Resident Evil Village a 95 out of 100, just like Resident Evil 7. I think both games are equal, more or less, in terms of quality. I still like Resident Evil 7 a little bit more because of the just like the gritty like aspect of it, like the close confined setting just make it such a unique game, and it was so groundbreaking at the time, and it just really like changed the horror video game landscape forever. So I kind of like a little bit more, but they're both great. So yeah, 95 for Resident Evil Village. It's such an amazing work of art. There's so many things to talk about it. But yeah, that's all my thoughts for now, and I can't wait to see what Capcom has in store for the future. Like if we get a Resident Evil 9, I hope it kind of like covers a different horror theme, maybe like more oriented towards Silent Hill. Like we all know by this point, they're not afraid to, you know, get creative in the studio. So we'll see what happens. So anyways, that's all for today, and I'll see you later. Bye.